touched on culture, and also like you were both talking about something that I always consider athlete-centered development. So if you start with the athlete in the middle of it, and then what goes on away from that, and the parents is something so important. You think of the more evolved sporting cultures, Finland's hockey, Sweden's hockey, they do a great job. European soccer countries, they take relatively smaller numbers, and you're perennial powerhouses, and they have that culture of what is cool, to use your words, speed and strength and agility and balance and coordination. That is cool. But having that, where I had somebody from Finland hockey talk about, all right, it's the athlete. They're a person. Number one is them as a person. Number two is them as an athlete. And then number three was them as a hockey player. And then they get to the fourth thing would be whichever position that hockey player played. And it was all about that. And then educating and involving the parents. I always look at it as it's more of like involving the parents in what's going on, because a lot of development happens, whether we like it in our space or not, when they get in the car and they drive home. If they've got an 8-minute drive home, that's way better for their development than they have a 30, because they're getting a lot of expertise in that 30 minutes, whether or not that family has it or they don't. So, and I think that's up to all of us to encourage the conversations with the parents, and know that some parents may or may not have played the sport. And probably the most dangerous ones are the ones that played. I played baseball in 1990. If my son wanted baseball advice, I'm probably the last guy that should give it, unless I re-educate myself on, the techniques of it. And I think the more that the coaches break that down and just speak to people, because they all have the same thing in common, that athlete-centered, the coach wants the same thing as the parents do, which is a good experience and for the kids to improve. And it's important, I think, that everyone who's involved in it is communicating consistently with families. I don't think you can do like what used to be like, I'm not talking to parents anymore. It's just it's not the right thing to do.
It's not the right thing to do. And you raise a great point, and I'm quite confident in saying that's a very underdeveloped area. Very little time is spent helping educate the parents, it's no different than who's the biggest teacher in people's kids' lives. It's usually their parents, at home. And so not all the teaching goes on in the classroom. Well, the same thing here. If parents can serve in a role to provide a supportive message, but oftentimes they don't know what that is, related to a particular sport. Maybe in general terms, certainly about working hard and being a good teammate and so forth. But I think many of us in the sports industry can do a way better job of help facilitating that education for parents.
I'm guilty of a 30-minute drive. Oh, yeah. Yeah, Phil.
He moved further away from the field. So
He used to coach it all the way home. It's interesting in the world of like European model versus United States. I've been over there. Like I've seen firsthand, what these Premier League teams are doing and things like that. That the unique thing that we have is we're mostly pay to play. So parents are funding a lot of the stuff that their children are doing over there, especially in England. Like they're being identified early. They're not necessarily paying to play. So it's a different model per se from development perspective. I think our model could be way better. I don't know if we'll ever get to a model like they have, but certainly early introduction to sports could be better. Like for what and how we're doing. I think I would say, even in my own experience, we probably put our child or our children into travel baseball too early. It probably didn't matter whether or not they played travel baseball at 9 or 10 versus first year 12. There's so much development that happens physically with these children between 8 years old and 12 years old. Some of them skyrocket and they're enormous. I mean, look at the Little League World Series. These kids are giants, right? And then some of them are mini mites. They're 67 pounds, and then you got 6'3", 185 pounds, right? And there's such a different level. But if you look at how those, what was it, like 1% of all little leaguers ever made it to the big leagues, and they're the best at 12 years old, and you're like, there's only a handful of them that ever got that far, and some of the sensations never even played high school baseball. So to me, some of this hyper focused, like we're talking about travel sport, the money that we're putting towards going out of town and things like that could be better prioritized to something that would be more developmental, more foundational to these athletes earlier, that would benefit them in longer run. And in a short term, you want your kid to win and you want them to feel good about winning, but maybe that's not the way.
Yeah, I've heard the rhetoric, which it always resonates with me, is like win the race to the right finish line. If you're not playing at 18, 19, 20, you're not achieving some goals that you might set out for, or parents set out for. And if that's so interesting, because I've heard Don Granado used to talk about this. You're the best of your birth year. Well, there's 22 birth years in the NHL. And everyone was the best in their birth year, in their city, that type of thing. So making sure that they're engaged and they love it and they want to compete, those are the things that coaches need to do.
I guarantee we never saw the best player that's ever lived. Like they never went to the NHL. They never went to the MLB. They early retired, like the majority of people do, where they quit for whatever reason. The parent lost their job. They couldn't afford it. They had to go work. There's so many reasons why they lost the love to play the game. Their parent drove them, the 30-minute ride home, put them over the edge, and that was it. They didn't want to play any longer, and that was, and they just never got there. And so that stuff happens all the time. I mean, there are people that every year, I'm always surprised about the people that stay in sports, and I'm always surprised about the people that early retire, and they're just sort of, I trained a football player for a long time. He made the Lions practice squad, and within 6 weeks, he quit. And like, dude, for this kid he was football like I've never seen somebody. The family, the support that he had for football was incredible. Everybody celebrated all the accomplishments. I mean, he had everything that there was. It was once he got there, it was too hard. I mean, players all the time that get to the culmination of like what their sport is, and they're just like, all right, I'm here. It's not exciting to them anymore. I mean, people quit all the time for a various number of reasons, and sometimes it doesn't have anything to do with their ability. So I think it's an interesting thing as sports go on that people don't talk about. In terms of whether or not they make it to what they want it to be. That's why I don't get too crazy about sports anymore on it, because everybody does their sport for whatever reason they have.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, that whole support, everyone around every athlete or person plays such a role in it. And to Tom's point, the parents that are a teacher, but you don't know who that uncle is or cousin they look up to, and what drives them. And we talked a little bit about other sports. We've seen other athletes from that play. We talked quite a bit about hockey and baseball. Lots of athletes come through here. Is there some sort of uniqueness about different sports? We have figure skaters in here, tennis players. We got all kinds of different athletes, which I think is a really cool part about this environment. But what's something that's unique or something that's different about the different sports, the different athletes from different sports?
Well, I'm going to say, culturally, certainly there's differences, team sport versus individual sports. I've mostly competed in team sports, whether it was in a player role or a coach role, which is way different than, I remember, playing tennis and it's just you know where the errors lie, and it's just, the dynamic is just different. So I think that's one of the neat places about a melting pot like this. When you get different athletes, I think it's a real benefit. One of my favorite parts of when I was involved at Michigan State is seeing the different athletes from the different teams interact with one another and see it, watch that dynamic and see how it unfolded. So there are so many similarities, but without a doubt, there are differences within the culture of each sport. I remember being invited when I started coaching there to be in the dugout with the baseball team and watch the different dynamics of how that team reacted, and got to go be on the bench with the women's volleyball team and see the different dynamics. So, it's hard to address cultural in a blanket statement, but that to me is one of the notable things. While so much is common, there are cultural differences.
To kind of be on the other end of that, I think like the unique part of a place like this is that everybody that comes in identifies with the idea that they want to be good. And it doesn't matter what sport you're in, whether you're a figure skater or you're a hockey player, there's a certain level of respect that I think, a professional hockey player has for a professional baseball player, that has for a professional football player. It doesn't matter what sport they play. And I think the cool part is that they're like, yeah, this guy or girl gets it.
Without a doubt.
They get it and they work hard, and there's just that level of like, we're on the same level. And that's the coolest part to me. And I don't even think they, the athletes themselves even care like what, do they use a stick? Do they use their hands? Are they, twirling? It doesn't matter. They're just like, okay, this guy obviously works hard, Olympic athlete. It doesn't even matter what it is. So I think that's the most unique portion of a place like this. We had a really high level NCAA football player come in and he joined the group like he was a dude, didn't know anybody, and everybody's just dabbing him up and like, hey, what's going on? And that level of player is really unique, and there's such a small community that I think there's this level of respect that they have for each other. So to me, that's the most impressive part of a place like this, and how we can bring those groups together and they can kind of identify amongst each other.
I think when you look at the big picture of what the value of sports is, like that's working in the real world. You want to surround yourself with people who have different specialties, but want to work hard, want to be great at what they're doing, want to interact well. And, those are things you learn by playing multiple sports, by being in a place like this where you're around, some differences, but you have that similarity, and having the similarities of wanting to work hard and, compete and be the best at what you're doing. Like those are values that'll take you far in life. And that's what sports should be giving us.
Yeah. It's easy for that level, to see it. And you can feel it too. Like when they're all in and doing it. I think you have that level with the younger kids too, that there's a certain level, like they know like this guy or girl, they work hard, they belong, and not trying to make it a club or nothing, but that's just, I think everybody strives to be in that sort of a club at some point.
Well, that is
high level
sports. It is if you can learn through your youth experience to develop skills where you try your hardest in whatever you do. If you try your hardest in whatever you do, I don't care what profession you go into, it's a good skill to have.
Yep.
Whether you like it or not. You don't like going to the rink or going to the field or going to the court every day. It's hard, So developing habits, developing routines, developing the resilience it takes for the highs and lows of dealing with sport at any competitive level. Those are challenges, but those skills can transcend a good, a meaningful sports experience. It's not always good, but a meaningful sports experience into many things well beyond sports.
What advice, we've talked about parents being a support mechanism, obviously such an important part of any child's athlete's development. What advice would you give parents to best support their athletes?
For me, because I have children multiple children in sports and things that they do, I regularly ask them what they're participating in, what they're, having conversations with them about what they did for practice and what they're trying to learn. And I don't think parents ask enough of that. I have several friends that have kids, and I just feel like that's not a common conversation. I think they put them in sports, take up time, and put them in, give them something to do. Sometimes, even for me, sometimes it's like a point of okay, they're on somebody else's clock right now. But I still make a point of trying to discuss with them what they are doing and what they're participating in and how they feel like they're getting better and what they're learning at practice. And, it's common for my kid to go, I don't remember, but then I continue the conversation. I force it out of them. And I think a lot of parents will pass on that and they'll be like, all right, whatever, and then just be done with the conversation. But I've really worked hard to ask Braxton, what'd you work on at practice today? Were you on defense or offense? Did you, were they working on, certain play? Did you have to pick up a guy? What was your role in that? To kind of get him to think about and process what he did, because a lot of times I don't think that we're challenging the kids enough, and then they leave practice and they don't think about it again. Then they come back and they still make the mistake. And it's a good way to kind of reinforce what they did at practice, or what did they do in the gym today? My son will go work out with our staff. I'll say, did you work on sprinting today? What'd you learn about sprinting? Oh, I got to get my knees up. I got to drive back. I pulled a sled, whatever it might be. I'm kind of giving another opportunity for him to think about what he did and then regurgitate it a little bit to then process it and bring it back the next time.
I spent more of my time focused on, I had 5 kids go through youth sports.
I didn't have 5.
They all had played a variety of things. And I didn't have a technical knowledge of all the sports that they played, so I couldn't ask necessarily good technical questions. But if they were all sitting here today and you asked them, what did your dad, what was he like as a sports parent? They would say, well, he'd always ask when we came home from or got off, practice, if we worked hard when the coach wasn't watching. That was my one thought. I remember as a youth, in whatever sport I was playing in, especially hockey, we'd be skating laps or something, and you'd see all the guys who would quit, and would stop or would pull up when the coach turned their back. And it always left an impression from as young as I could remember, 8, 9 years old, and I just think that was a message that, there's a definition of your character being who you are when no one's watching. And that's what I was focused on, is I want to make sure you're trying your hardest. Because oftentimes you may not want to try your hardest, but I want you to figure out that that's important to do, all the time. So that was one area of focus. Again, I stayed away from the technical, because I think a lot of parents aren't going to know the technical aspects. And at the same time, you got to find a way to support the coach, because the coach's role is to teach the technical, and you're going to have good coaches and not so good coaches, without a doubt. But there are going to be things that your athlete, your kid's not going to like, and it's not going to go well. So how do you parent them to understand those are decisions? They're the coach. They're in charge. I remember one time my daughter came to me and asked me, how am I going to get more playing time? And, in a short way to describe it here, I essentially said, you may need to have, you better work as hard as you're working every day. You got to be the hardest worker on the team. That's 1. 2 is you may need 4 players to get sick or injured before you get an opportunity. And 3 is you might want to sit closer to the coach on the bench. Maybe she'll notice you, So she didn't hear me say, just work harder. Work harder is not always the answer, And she was a hard-working kid, And then, similar to what Joe talked about, I didn't really engage the conversation. I only engaged that the kid wanted to. And I've had the polar opposites. I've had kids call me after every single game they played in college and want to tell me every detail and talk about it. I had other kids who'd call me twice a season, when they're in college. So it really varied, and I think as your kid, you can adapt accordingly.
I think there's an interesting idea behind, the coach doesn't like me, that's why I don't play. I've had my children have been on that thought process. We had to re-engineer that thought process, because maybe they started a little bit later than some of the other kids, or they didn't have as much experience as other kids. And my message to them was like, look, you have to earn your playing time, and the coach is going to put the best team out there that he thinks is going to benefit the rest of the team. So there's other kids on the team too that want to play. You're not the only one that wants to play. So you're going to show that you want to be in the lineup or be on the roster for that day by working hard, always working hard, being consistent, listening, showing that you're listening, which I think is part of being in front of the coach. Like, I think that's a lacking thing. Like, if I was a player, I would be next to the coach, listening to what that person is saying, so that then I can give them back exactly what they're looking for, instead of, kind of like off, la la land, and then he says, something to me, and I give him half of what he wants, and then you wonder why you're getting that type of reaction from the coach. And so, I've had them like, listen, like, you're on the team, like, it's your job to make the starting lineup. If you want to make it, it's up to you. You got to work hard. You got to always, somebody's always watching, things of that nature. Like, I think that's why football, I think, has been really great for, my son, particularly because he has, I always, when he comes home, I said, "Did you run hard all day today?" That's the first thing I ask him. And he's like, "Yeah." And I know the coach, so I was like, "Hey, is my kid running hard?" He's, "Oh yeah, he's running hard." So it's good that his perception of him working hard is actually aligned with what the coach is saying. And so, but I think those are spot on with
One of
that
the
approach to.
media pieces I've ever seen, and for listeners of this, you can go hunt down a Tom Brady piece. What I love about Tom Brady isn't that he became the greatest quarterback to ever play, but his process to get there. It's an incredible story because he wasn't the best. When he showed up at Michigan, I don't know what he's 7 deep. He wanted to transfer, so he wanted to quit. And his parents, you talk about parental guidance. No, you stay the course. His coach coached him and said, "No, you stay the course." And he was complaining. He talked in this one piece that I really like that I've seen on social, is he talked about going to the coach and complaining it was everybody's fault he wasn't playing. It's everybody else's fault. And he's saying, "I'm not getting the opportunity." I went through this as a player. I remember it, and I didn't handle well. I wish I had a do-over, But he went in there, and finally the coach said, "Listen, if you get 2 reps, you're going to be really good in your 2 reps if you want to get 3 reps. Yeah. And if you get 3 reps, you better play those 3 reps like they're your Super Bowl to get 4 reps, And he said, that's what I did until I earned 20 reps, and, it grew. And then I finally got an opportunity to play. And so we tend as parents, going back to the original question, is it's hard. It's hard not to just be this loving parent. It's hard to be a hard parent, and coach hard. It's not easy, but that's needed because that's reality. I would always say, hey, if you make an impact for your coach and help your coach win, he or she is going to find time to play it. They don't have a hard time finding the time for the best players to play. So figure out how you get yourself there, or as close to there as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. They're a really good youth coach, had all of the players list what they said was a good teammate. So what is a good teammate? And the coach articulated it to the families via, the communication strategies. This team came up with, these are the top 5 things to be a good teammate. That's your questioning when you get in the car. Did you do this? And did you encourage? Did you give a good effort? Those type of questions, and it helped guide the parents. And like I said, this coach is when sometimes you strike gold, and it's a soccer coach who's parent coach who has all the experience in the world, but is level-headed. It's like, there you go. Now all of a sudden you have a template of what you're saying. Now, it didn't give me any opportunity to flash my soccer knowledge, which I had none of, but it was that type of idea that I think the parents can really go by that. But it comes back to what we're saying with coach communication. Coaches can't hope for the best with their families. They need to communicate. They need to talk to their coaches about it. So the last thing here, we got the athlete lab, the way it's set up with, like, a lot of gyms are set up. You might not necessarily be able to see what's going on in the entire time, or I guess part of our conversation, you might not really know what's going on. So when you're doing something which is clearly a supplemental thing to a very important supplemental training, you mentioned cognitive training, you mentioned, like the speed and agility and strength and power, like how can you explain what goes on in the athlete lab from an overall, like, holistic athlete development that parents might not be able to see, or even if they do look in, they might not quite understand what they're looking at?
So I would say as we engage in training with an athlete, we're going to create some benchmarks for them to start, and then try to build off those benchmarks. So the way that we're able to drive data collection, and the way that we're able to show these athletes real time what they're doing from a sprinting standpoint, a reaction standpoint, a explosive effort standpoint, we can give them feedback right away. And so with parents, we can provide that information to them. We're going to continue to try to build that out this year within the academy and within the coaching staff and things of that nature, to give them constant data to show them that, hey, they're evolving as an athlete. And that's really our goal. Like, we want to take an athlete from point A and subtly move them up on, a little bit of an angle, right? And move them to the next quadrant of output. And how we like to do that is not very sharp. In order to create a good foundation for these athletes, they're not going to have these like crazy like increases in ability. They're going to have subtle increase over time, which is going to have a better foundation for them, which is going to make them more injury resilient, which is going to make them more robust as an athlete. And that's how we're going to improve them. And that's how we're going to show their parents that they're going to improve over time. And yeah, they don't get to maybe peek in through the window all the time. There's just not enough space. We just don't have the ability to do that. But I think by providing them, the athletes, with that information that they can take home, or, with more content like this, people are going to get more trustworthy with what's happening within the environment, and ultimately buy in more to the
other part is an extension from their practice field or the ice, because they're organized in a certain way. They have to work within a group. They're getting coached. They're not just out there doing their own thing. But at the end of the day, similar habits are trying to be developed. While maybe technique, or by their age, you're being introduced to new things or new movements. Every person controls their work habits, that their effort, and they control their attitude. And whether they're on the ice, on the field, in the gym, those two things, they need to learn to be responsible for and give great effort. One of the things I love about the weight room compared to, say, the ice or the court is you're taking the skill of the sport out of the equation, and everybody could work on a similar platform. Everybody can work on their strength. Everybody can improve their strength. And so I remember in college many years ago when I was coaching as a young assistant coach, we had a first-round draft pick on our team, an NHL first-round draft pick. And he was very confident on the ice, and he was incredibly unconfident in the weight room, and he stayed away from it, which hurt him until he matured and realized to embrace it. But it also that weight room can give maybe not the best players on the team per se at the various age levels an opportunity to shine in an environment different than their playing field, So there's so many benefits to it today. I think they're countless, and I do think even here, in spite of some of the space restrictions, just to have general observation, if we can find better ways to educate and even provide that exposure, so maybe on at least a limited basis, so parents would have a chance to see a little bit more.
I mean, the competition level is definitely rising, and making more compete, I think, is a big thing, because at the end of the day, really the kids at the ages are all on the same level. So really it's a race to see who can be, top of the leaderboard for whatever aspect that we're trying to control or trying to elicit, right? So whether it be jump height or, speed of a 10 or speed of a 20, those are all areas that everybody's competing on the same level of off of the ice, because it's taking out the talent portion, like Tom's saying, which I think is an important part. So everybody participates. So technically they're all on the same level.
And it kind of measures, if you want to call it athleticism, a little more than just the sports skill, where in the sport of hockey, as we know, the skating skill dictates a lot of success of the other skills. How well you can shoot, how well you can handle the puck, and so forth, you know. Whereas you put everybody on their feet, everybody can run and jump to some degree, but measuring athleticism in general creates a little different playing field than it does on the court or on the field or ice.
Yeah, it's almost a multi-sport athlete within a single sport when you do that. And sports scientists, the ones I've read recently, you know, it's 50% genetics, 50% environment. Trying to create that environment where they can get faster, they can jump fast, they can jump higher, but they can compete, because that's the one X factor that if you're not competitive, your ceiling in any sport and almost in the environment is much lower. So developing that compete in young athletes is super important.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a certain level of pedigree that comes into some of this as these athletes are getting older, and you see, I've had a number of athletes that had children, and maybe they weren't that great when they were younger, but all of a sudden they matured a little bit, they got a little bit more aware, and all of a sudden their competitiveness took over and their athleticism started to form, and they became a player. So
yeah, this is really good, guys. It's really interesting, and hopefully that people are able to listen to this and really dive into a lot of the little kind of nuggets that taken away. And I appreciate your time.
No problem. Thanks for having us. Well.